All right, buddy. Did you get the measurement? All right, so what was it? 54. Exactly 54? You don't know? How do you not know? You told me you got the measurement. Well, are you willing to cut me down another tree and mill me some new lumber if you got this wrong? Well, then I guess you need to go back and measure it again. Oh, hey, can you wait just a minute? Oh, and Stephen, you can't start mudding that wall. We haven't... You know what? I've got some people here. I need to take care of it. I'll tell you what. Why don't you go around the back of the house and help George and Luke re-thatch the roof where they fell through it yesterday? And I don't want to hear you teasing Luke again with that whole "I'm your father" stuff. I don't even see why you think that's funny. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I forgot you were there. Oh, you like that? Well, yeah, I find that kind of, when things are getting a little out of control, that kind of refocuses me, you know? It kind of helps me to get my head back on straight. Well, I've got a cousin. He's up in Philippi, and I guess the guy that founded their church or something, he came up with that. I don't know. But I find it works for me. Jesus? Yeah, I know Jesus. Well, I mean, technically, I never actually met him while he was among us, but I did hear him speak once. Well, yeah, that was a few years back. I was living with this woman. Man, we were a mess. I mean, actually, each of us separately was a mess. Together, we were more like a caravan wreck that's just looking for a place to happen. Actually, that's not even right. We're more like a caravan wreck in progress. Well, you know, we each had our issues. Like, I mean, for me, well, I guess I was about 9. I was an only child at that point. But when I was 9, my mom got pregnant again. And, well, naturally, she was a little older than she'd been when I was born. It was kind of a tough pregnancy, and my little brother was born, but my mother died in childbirth. And I mean, up to that point, she had been pretty much my whole world. And for I guess I was 10 by that point, you know, I was mad at her for leaving me. I was mad at my little brother for being here. And with all that, I guess I really wasn't all that much help to my dad, who was left with the two of us. So he pretty quickly remarried. She didn't like me much. And she was okay with my little brother because I guess, you know, he was a baby and she could pretend that he was hers, I guess. But we really didn't get along too well. So I hung around for a while, but when I got to be about 14, I left home and stayed with some friends for a while. Then this guy he was building houses, and he needed some help, so I worked for him. He gave me a place to stay and fed me. Then I married young. Young and stupid, I think that's what they say. Well, yeah, she ended up leaving me for a tax collector. Leave me for a slime ball like that, but he had money. That was what was important. So that was a dark period for me. I was drinking a lot at that point, which didn't do much for business. And that's where I met her, Deb. Yeah, she had just buried her husband, which really wasn't a bad thing, as it turns out, because he was kind of a nasty old guy. Didn't treat her too well. In fact, he came home all riled up about something and was actually smacking her around when he had the heart attack. So she wasn't too broken up, and he had money, so she was left with the house and some money. She wanted to do some work on the house. We got to talking, and I agreed to do the work on the house, and next thing I know, we're living together. But her, this guy, the one that had just died, he was number 5. Let's see, she didn't have a great track record. Yeah, the first one, if I remember correctly, he died of alcohol poisoning. The second one, he died in a bar fight. The third one, actually, he was probably the best of them all. He was a pretty good guy from what I understand, but he left her when she started sleeping with number 4. Not sure what actually ever happened to number 4. Well, I don't know, but when I met her, like I said, number 5 had just been put in the ground. So we were both pretty much a mess. And she, I guess because of all these marriages, she was sort of paranoid. She thought people were talking about her. So she didn't like to go out much. We didn't have much of a social life. I saw a few of my friends here and there, but the only time she would go out, she'd go out at noon to go to the well to get water for us. Because nobody goes to the well at noon. It's hot as blazes. But that's why she went, because she knew there would be nobody there. She wouldn't have to see anybody or talk to anybody. Then if we needed water later in the day, she would send me. Well, then there was this day. She left the house at noon to go out to the well, like always. But she didn't come back as quickly as usual. And when she came home, she was different. As soon as she walked in the door, I thought, what happened to her? She had this, it's almost a glow about her. She was smiling. And it wasn't just, a sort of smile. She was exuding joy. To be honest, I don't think I had ever seen anybody looking like she did that day. Certainly not her. And now, I got to say, she didn't really have a particularly good way with words. She came in, and I said, "So, what's up?" And she said, "Well, I met this guy at the well." Oh, no. I said, really? A guy at the well? The well you go to at noon because nobody is ever there. And you met a guy there. Yeah, and you have to move out. Really? Okay, then. Well, I have to admit, I didn't handle it quite as well as I am right now. There were some words exchanged. Well, I was really the one doing the exchanging. And I walked out. I had a friend down the street, and he said I could crash at his place for a few days. But the strangest thing started to happen. All of a sudden, we realized that the whole neighborhood was talking. They were talking about this woman who had been to the well and had met somebody and was completely different. Finally, I stopped a couple of people in the road. I said, well, where did you get this story? They said, oh, Deb down the street, she told us. It was her. I said, well, wait a minute. You talked to Deb? Yeah. Today. And she talked to you? I thought, wow, this doesn't make any sense. And they said, she told us all about this guy. We're going there now to hear what he has to say. And I thought, well, all right, I'll tag along. Well, it wasn't at all what I expected. I mean, first of all, he was a Jew. Now, I don't know if you know much about this area, but you see, this area, so Samaria, it used to be the capital of Israel. I mean, it was the place, at least in the northern kingdom, to be till the Assyrians came in and started intermarrying with the other people because they were here. Well, real Jews didn't look too kindly on all that and pretty much have had nothing to do with us ever since. I mean, we're right in the middle of the country. If you go from the north, like, say, Galilee or somewhere, to Jerusalem for one of the high holy days, or you're going from Jerusalem to the northern part, we're right there in the middle. But most Jews, they'll go a day's journey around just to not have to come through here. So the fact that this guy, a Jew, would show up in Samaria, I mean, this was right after Passover. I assume he had been down to Jerusalem and he was headed back north, but nobody comes through here. And he comes through and he talks to us. I mean, it was sort of beyond anything we had ever experienced. And he was nice. I mean, he was kind to us. He spent time with us. He stayed for a couple of days. In fact, a lot of people said he was the Messiah. Well, I wasn't too sure about that at the time, but I realized pretty quickly that the stuff I had been thinking was not what was going on with him and Deb. So a little while later, I went by Deb's house. I apologized for some of the things I'd said. I said, I went to listen to him. He seems like a nice guy. I guess I got the wrong idea. And she apologized for the way she had handled it. She said she could have broke the news a little more gently. I asked her if I could buy her some coffee sometime. She said sure. So we went out for coffee one day. That's when she told me the whole story. See, she had gone out that day to go to the well. At noon, like usual. She didn't want to have to deal with anybody else. She didn't want to have to talk to anybody. But then she got to the well, and And he was already there. But by the time she realized there was someone else there, she said it was kind of awkward to just turn around and go home. And before she could even really think about what she wanted to do, he spoke to her. He said, listen, can you give me a drink? I'm kind of thirsty here. Well, that's why you don't go to the well at noon. Well, naturally, she was kind of dumbfounded. I mean, first of all, she recognized that this must be a Jew and a Jewish man. A Jewish man would not speak to a Samaritan at all, but certainly not a woman. So she said she stammered a little bit, and she said, are you talking to me? And he said the strangest thing. She said she remembers it clear as day. He said, if you knew who it was who asked you for a drink, you would have asked me for a drink. And I would have given you living water that you might never thirst again. Well, she didn't know any better, and I probably would have done the same thing. She thought he was being literal. And, given her propensity to avoid other people, she thought, wow, that would be awesome. If you could give me water that I could drink and not have to be thirsty ever again, I wouldn't even have to come out here to the well. Well, he was nice to her, but I think he chuckled a little bit about that. He said, well, it's more of an internal thing. It's like a well of life bubbling up within you. She said, well, can you give me some of this water? And that's when he said, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you go home, Deb? He called her Deb. And get your husband. And bring him back here. Now, that really wasn't unusual. I mean, really, the proper thing to do in this situation was to have her husband come and to talk with him about this. The problem is this was Deb. This was what she had been avoiding. This was the very reason she went to the well at noon when nobody would be there, to avoid this very conversation. This hit her right where she lives. And she said, even though she could barely bring herself to say the words, and as she said, she couldn't even look up. She just stared at the ground as she said, I have no husband. And she said he reached out and he gently took her by the chin and raised her face to look at him. And he looked into her eyes. And she said, as I looked into his eyes, all of the guilt and the shame and the fear and the anger just fell away. Even as he said, Deb, you have spoken the truth. Because you have no husband. You've had 5 husbands. And that man who is waiting for you back at your home, he's not your husband. Now, normally that would have crushed her. But she said it was like a weight fell from her. Finally, somebody knew her secret. Somebody knew her secret shame, the thing that had kept her imprisoned all these years. And yet she knew by the way that he looked at her that he wasn't condemning. She said she felt perhaps for the first time in her life that somebody really loved her, that somebody cared. She said she tried to pull herself together and she said, "You must be a prophet. Because how could you even know my name, much less my life?" Can you tell me? Because you know that the Jews reject us, and they say that we should worship God in Jerusalem, but we can't even go there, and we worship God here. And she said he looked at her and he said, "Deb, there will come a time. In fact, I'm telling you, that time is now. When those who worship God truly and in spirit and in truth can worship God wherever they gather together." Well, that struck her as something very un-Jewish. She said, "Well, I've heard that the Jews talk about this Messiah that is going to come to restore the nation of Israel. Now, we don't really talk about that much here because I'm not sure they really include us." And she said he smiled at her and he said, "I am he." She said suddenly all the pieces fell together. She said she just ran. But not running in fear, but skipping and laughing and running with joy back to the house where she broke the news somewhat awkwardly to me. But even my reaction didn't stop her. She then went out into the neighborhood and the neighbors that she had been avoiding, and began telling them the story. And she said it was amazing. They listened to me. They didn't reject me. They heard what I had to say, and in fact, they all wanted to meet this guy too. And so she took them to Jesus. Well, when she had told me the whole story, she asked me if I would like to accept Jesus as the Messiah, as my Savior, and she prayed with me, and everything's been different. We started dating. And we discovered we loved each other. You see, before, we had really just been together because we each had a need and an emptiness, a hole. But somehow Jesus filled that hole and freed us to love each other. A few months later, we got married. And our big question was, what do we do now? I mean, Jesus gave everything for us, even us, Samaritans, the ones rejected even by the people of God. What could we give back? And so we started this little construction company. We take in boys who've had troubled lives, who are homeless, who've been kicked out of their homes. And we train them. We teach them a skill. We talk to them about Jesus. You know, the first kid we hired is my little brother. He's now one of my foremen. That's grace. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound. It saved a wretch like me. Let's stand together and sing.